Hi again then guys, and welcome to another walk down memory lane, in effect, to the first Test Drive Unlimited game again, to take a look at another motorbike. Not an Italian exotic this time like the Ducati or the MV Agusta. This one is, I would say, probably the best all-round motorbike that's in the game as standard, because the bike that I would say is the best in terms of bang for buck, performance all-round, is the Kawasaki ZX-10R. But that bike is of course a DLC vehicle, whereas this one, the ZX-10R, is in the game as standard. Now, being a Japanese sport bike, in pretty much any game that would feature a bike like this, you would assume that the value is going to be pretty good. The price is going to be affordable, it's going to be probably quite lightweight, reasonably powerful at least, and probably a very good all-rounder. It just tends to not necessarily fall short, but not quite have the level of, you could say, exotic design that an Italian bike might have, or maybe the luxury factor, although of course that would apply more to a car, generally speaking, than it would to a bike. Now, in the case of this Kawasaki, that's exactly what you get. You get a well-priced bike which can pretty easily outrun most, if not all, of the other bikes in the game under the right circumstances and with the right tuning, but it's one which is just the best all-round package for the lowest possible price. Because with the Ducati 999, with the MV Agusta F4, they are fairly expensive bikes. They are the most expensive bikes in the game. Now, of course, the prices on those bikes is still nowhere near most of the cars, but for a bike, 40 or 50 grand is a lot of cash, even in a game. Whereas for this bike, you're looking at 14,000 credits, which makes it one of the cheapest vehicles in the entire game. That's barely more than the Z1000, which of course is the other Kawasaki, the city bike. That one's okay. I'm not a huge fan of city bikes myself, I know plenty of people are, but this one is the big daddy as far as the standard bikes in the game go, or the standard Kawasaki's more specifically. Now, the engine is, as the 10R name suggests, a 1 litre, it's a 998cc, 4-cylinder inline. It's putting out 184 horsepower and 84 pound-feet of torque. Now, in a bike that only weighs 170 kilos, which is, as we postulated earlier, lighter than the Italian bikes, that's a pretty huge horsepower per kilo or horsepower per tonne equivalent weight ratio. In fact, this bike puts out nearly 1.1 horsepower for every kilo of its weight, which is even better than a Yamaha R1, at least from around 2006. Now, in car terms, so in other words horsepower per tonne instead of per kilo, which is more relevant to a car, that's the equivalent of nearly 1100 horsepower per tonne, over 1080 in fact, so it's not too surprising that the performance on this bike is fantastic. Now, if you modify it, of course you can get it to go even quicker, but even standard you can easily get it up around 200 miles per hour. If you push forward on the controller, you can duck down as the rider and it will go even quicker. In fact, if memory serves, you can actually get this up around a similar kind of level to the Ducati, if not the MV Agusta. Now, it's not quite as quick as the ZX-10R, which you'd kind of hope it wouldn't be, given that that bike has a lot more power, and in the real world as well it is a faster machine, but the advantage of the 10R over the 12R in particular, but also definitely over the Ducati and the MV Agusta, is the cornering ability mixed in with the brutal straight line speed, because the MV Agusta has outstanding top-end speed, pretty good handling, pretty good acceleration. The Ducati is moderate at everything, but not necessarily outstanding. It's a nice all-rounder, whereas the Kawasaki is brutal for acceleration, not necessarily quite as strong as a couple of the others for top speed, but great through corners. The throttle response, the way the engine likes to be worked, it's very high revving, not overly torquey, but certainly very powerful, especially in the higher rev range, whereas something like a Ducati is more of a thumpy bike. It's got a lot of low-end torque, and you can feel that. Whereas in the case of the 10R, it's just a case of having more bang for buck. It really is as simple as that. For 14 grand, you've got a bike which can outrun almost any car in the game in terms of acceleration. The only things that can beat it are basically the absolute top-tier hypercars or supercars, and more often than not you'll even have to modify them to be able to outrun this thing. The kind of cars required to out-accelerate this Kawasaki, you're talking stuff like Saleen S7s, Koenigsegg's. Anything less than that is going to struggle. Now, for top-end speed, of course, there are plenty of cars in the game that can outrun it, but that's the point. It gets there so quickly that even though the top speed of around 205, 210 when you duck down isn't as quick as a number of supercars, it gets there so much quicker than many of them, and so it feels faster overall anyway. Whereas compared to something like, for instance, one of my personal favourite cars, the Adonis, which is another DLC vehicle, it's got fantastic top-end speed, but the low-end acceleration isn't quite as quick as some. Under those kind of circumstances, you can have a car like that one which has way better top speed, but still just cannot keep up with this thing. Now, as I said, the 12R is definitely a quicker bike. I used to win loads of drag races online with the Ninja 12R, but it is a DLC, and that's the problem. You can't easily access it in the game anymore. In fact, I can't get any of my DLC vehicles anymore, which is really annoying because some of them were among the coolest vehicles in the game, I would say. But for now, you can get this one in the game as standard. If you are not necessarily a super fan of brands like the Italian ones, for instance, Kawasaki, MV Agusta, and you just want something that's really good for a really good price, then this is the no-brainer decision. Of course you should go for the 10R. It's basically the bike equivalent in the game of the Nissan GT-R for cars. It's got the great price, but also an all-round package that punches so far above its weight that you could actually take it up against cars that it shouldn't really have a chance against, and it will still beat them. Likewise with this Kawasaki, you can take it up against other bikes for sure, but even cars. As I said just now, cars that are, on paper, faster, and you'll find yourself still beating them. In terms of the overall package of the bike, it's pretty much perfect as far as Test Drive Unlimited goes. For me personally, I do still prefer the Ducati and the MV Agusta because I do like that Italian flair. I like the bikes to be a little bit more on the exotic side rather than just fast, but there's nothing wrong with being just fast. This bike gets the job done. It was one of my most used bikes in Test Drive 1, and for good reason. It's a dominating machine. And of course, it is in the MA category. But that's it overall for this particular throwback, if you will, to the first game. And of course, you can stick around on the channel for more reviews like this in the future. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.